Hi there guys, I hope you are having a good day. So we got the fight announced, Derek Chisora versus Joseph Parker on May 1st, and a card has also been put together for the undercard for this event. We got Katie Taylor versus Natasha Jonas, we also got Dimitry Bibble versus Craig Richards, Chris Eubank Jr. versus Marcus Morrison, and that will take place of course on May 1st. Now guys, go and put the kettle on, let's talk some boxing, let's talk about this show and the event as a whole. We also got to see some training footage as well of Joseph Parker working with his new trainer, Andy Lee. So let's break it down. Now of course working with Andy Lee, we are hoping that Joseph Parker is going to be a little bit more aggressive and have that edge to him. What we have been asking for since we saw him fight Andy Ruiz. I mean, he's shown it a little bit in that fight, he's shown it a little bit in the Dillian White fight. But there have been times where we've been thinking, come on Joseph Parker, just step on the gas, step to him, go for it. I mean, after the Shaundell Winters fight where he did go after his man, he said he was a little bit ragged and he wanted to tighten things up. No, you don't need to do that. You need to step on the gas, you need to take it to your man, because he's got a great chin, great movement. He's not the fastest on his feet, but he's got good footwork. He's fast as well, got good power. So there's no reason for him to be looking to box all the time. Sometimes that is appropriate, but at times you just need to get stuck in. And that is going to be very important in there with a Derek Chisora, someone who won't let him box, won't let him breathe, will be on him the whole time. So it is important that he's moving trainers to someone like Andy Lee and moving away from Kevin Barry. No disrespect to Kevin Barry, but I just don't think that he brought the best out of Joseph Parker. I think that Andy Lee will be able to get closer to that. Because in his last fight we got the same again. It was a Joseph Parker who was looking to box almost too polite at times as well, holding too much. I mean, it was a Junior Farr who was initiating the clinches, but Parker was doing little to work out of them. He was doing little to make any kind of difference. I mean, he was just looking at the ref, expecting him to break it. So it all falls down to Joseph Parker with regards to what he does next. And in that fight with Junior Farr, it's not all down to Joseph Parker to make a spectacle of it. This is Junior Farr's coming out party. It's his big opportunity. He needs to stamp his authority. So I don't believe that we can say, oh, Joseph Parker should have done this or should have done that, because he is the renowned world level operator compared to Junior Farr. Yes, there is that aspect to it, but come on, Junior Farr had a great opportunity on the world stage to prove what kind of fighter he is, so both of them had an obligation to stamp their authority and make that fight their own, and that didn't happen. But in a fight with a Derek Chisora, that will bring a different aspect from a Joseph Parker. It must, otherwise Derek Chisora will knock him out, he'll stop him, he'll find a way to break him down, because Joe Parker needs to find a way to be able to deal with the pressure that Derek Chisora will bring. He can't run, he cannot hide, he cannot keep moving. He might be able to outbox him for a couple of rounds, but that gap is going to be closed at some point by Derek Chisora. He needs to fight fire with fire, and working with Andy Lee, hopefully he gets more of that in him, to go after Derek Chisora, to make the fight his own, to stamp his authority. I've said it many times before, you won't get the best out of Joseph Parker if he's in there with Junior Farr, someone like that, someone who tries to box him. Hughie Fury, not the best at Joseph Parker. I mean, even in that fight when he was pinning Hughie Fury, he was following him around the ring. He wasn't cutting the ring off. So you can see that he doesn't have that to his game, where he's willing to go after his opponent. He's more of the guy who wants to box, but in there with Hughie Fury, he was forced to be the one pressing the action. But there were fundamental things that he wasn't doing in that fight that would have helped him greatly, like cutting off the ring. Those things will come working with Andy Lee. Now, let's talk a little bit about the undercard and some of the fights that have been put on, because it's a strange undercard. Natasha Jonas versus Katie Taylor, that's a great fight, I don't have a problem with it. I'm not saying I have a problem with the card as a whole. It is a pay-per-view though, so it does need to be a strong one. And it could be called into question whether some of the other fights, like say Dimitry Bivble versus Craig Richards, is that worthy to be a pay-per-view event, or on the undercard of a pay-per-view event, and Chris Eubank Jr. versus Marcus Morrison. Now, Marcus Morrison is like 30-3, so if you look at it like that, that's not a bad record, but then you see that he's lost to fighters such as Tyan Booth, and in his last fight the guy lost like 59 fights and only won 4 or 5, so this guy is not on the level of a Chris Eubank Jr., and you have to wonder, what does Chris Eubank Jr. get out of fighting this guy? Because he's in a situation now where he doesn't need learning fights, he doesn't need warm-up fights. He needs to try and make some of these big fights. I know that he's been inactive, and I guess we can just say, yeah, just have one comeback fight, then 12 weeks, get straight back into camp, have a big fight. But it just seems pointless to be fighting someone like Marcus Morrison at this stage for Chris Eubank. I really don't see what he gains by beating this guy. We've seen him in there with lower level oppositions, he's too good for them, but when he jumps to world level, he seems to struggle, and he's not going to get any better if he fights guys like this, then goes straight back to that point. He fights guys like this. Yes, he's fought Arthur Abrahams and that was a good fighter, but he was way past his best. Then he went in and fought someone like Anvi Yildirim, I believe, in the World Boxing Series, and managed to get to the semi-finals, then fighting a world level operator in George Groves. He came unstuck, but then after that he drops back down again. But he fought Korobov, he fought James DeGale as well. So those are two good fights, and they are quality operators, so why does he need to drop back down to a level of a Morrison, someone who was beaten by Tyan Booth? It is just strange that some of the fights that Chris Eubank Jr. ends up in. I believe that he has the potential to be in some great fights. Whether he can win them or not against the likes of Charlo is another thing entirely, but still, he can make a great fight of it. And I don't see how he can bridge that gap unless he starts fighting guys around that level instead of going from one extreme to another. He had good momentum with James DeGale, then Korobov, then remained inactive, partly not his fault because PBC just didn't get him at the bigger fights. And many said, why is he going to Sauerland when the big middleweights are on PBC or Matchroom? But he can't seem to work with Matchroom, but Sauerland can. So it is clear to see that Chris Eubank Jr. will be mostly fighting on Matchroom shows anyway, and perhaps he will finally get some of those big fights. I don't believe though that this one is going to get him any closer to those kind of fights. I really don't see the point in it. I guess it is just a comeback fight, a warm-up fight, a keep busy fight. So it can almost be justified, but he's not a prospect anymore. He needs to be working towards those big names, if those are the kind of fights that he wants to be in. Now, Dimitry Bibble versus Craig Richards. This is another strange kind of fight for the WBA Light Heavyweight World Championship because Craig Richards has mostly been fighting 6, 8 rounders, sometimes 10 rounders. I mean, his last fight was a 12 rounder, I believe, but before that, it was an 8 rounder. If you look at his career, he's rarely fought over the 12 rounds, and when he has, he lost to the likes of Frank Buglioni over a 12-round decision. Now, sometimes a decision loss early in their careers is worse than a KO loss, because often a KO loss can represent inexperience or perhaps mistakes, whereas a unanimous decision loss at that level proves the kind of level of boxer that that fighter is. Frank Buglioni has a power, so if he would have stopped Craig Richards, you could think, okay, maybe it was too soon, maybe he made a mistake, and that was why he lost. But he got outboxed, and that is a different thing entirely. That proves that he was unable to adjust, he was unable to outbox someone at that kind of level. And makes you wonder how he will get on with a world level operator like Dimitry Bivol, who can punch, who can box as well. So it just seems like another weird fight. I'm not saying that Craig Richards hasn't improved, and he cannot improve because of that. I mean, many fighters have been outboxed early in their careers, but you have to show that kind of improvement. And his resume doesn't prove that he has been improving continuously since that fight. He's been in some good fights, but the problem is going from a certain level to world level. Similar problem to Chris Eubank Jr., going from one extreme to another. I mean, you have to bridge the gap at some point. There needs to be that kind of middle fight for them to warrant having a world title opportunity, but not just that, to make someone believe that they have a chance when they go up against that level of opposition. It is a good card put together, but I'm not entirely sure if it is a pay-per-view. The main event is brilliant. The co-main, I guess they are putting it as, which is Katie Taylor versus Natasha Jonas, that is a good fight. The other two seem a little bit strange at the moment. But guys, anyway, what are your thoughts on this? Make sure you leave your thoughts in the comments below. Also leave a like and grab that subscribe button if you are new. Thanks guys.